Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John V. has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss the topic of the artificial intelligence tech war between China and the United States mainly, but also other countries, all developing artificial intelligence programs from Australia to Europe, from South Korea and Taiwan to Japan. There are many angles to this, and all of this, a lot of this, I shouldn't say all of this, a lot of this was prompted by the fact that a Chinese startup, a rather obscure company called DeepSeek, and those of you who follow world news know this, announced in late January a major breakthrough in chatbot, competing with Silicon Valley's much more advanced and much more capital intensive enterprise in comparison with that of the Chinese company. Now, there are many, many angles to artificial intelligence. Several years ago, I published an article in English and French entitled Artificial Intelligence, Socioeconomic, Political, and Ethical Dimensions, limiting myself to just the subtitle that is Socioeconomic, Political, and Ethical Dimensions, rather than the technical aspects of technical inner workings of how algorithms work in artificial intelligence and so forth. I want to point out that the perspective, the focus of the tech war and with regard to artificial intelligence specifically, but tech war in general, semiconductors, everything about self-driving cars, which of course has to do with artificial intelligence, the focus has been placed in the framework of nation states competing. And that is a rather curious position to look at it from. Now, the nation state has been around since the rise of capitalism. The rise of capitalism 500 years ago, approximately, transitioning from the feudal manorial system to capitalism, coincided with the rise of nation states, and the Treaty of Westphalia, of course, legitimized the idea of the nation state and national sovereignty, although neoliberals have gone back to 19th century imperialist assumptions about sovereignty resting really with the great powers and with the corporate sector over the state rather than with a nation state, let's say the smaller nation states whose role is really to accommodate corporate interests, global capitalism. My perspective on artificial intelligence, the tech race and artificial intelligence specifically, and then even more specifically, DeepSeek versus Silicon Valley, is really that this must be looked at in terms of what it offers to all people, not merely as an instrument of capital accumulation, how much money can be made by corporations serving an elite market, because clearly, as we'll see, the more sophisticated services of this, whether it's in the field. And artificial intelligence, I want to make sure, by the way, people understand this. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not interested in other words, diminishing the value of artificial intelligence. On the contrary, I believe that that all science and technology advancements that are applied for the good of humanity as a whole are positive developments. However, the issue here is how the application of science and technology takes place and who benefits, who is harmed. That's the issue here. And of course, there is no doubt that artificial intelligence can help in every field, from robotic surgery to mining enterprise to exploring deep space and so forth. So it can, if to doing menial tasks, by the way. So artificial intelligence per se is not the issue. That science and technology behind this is not the issue. The fact that artificial intelligence takes place within a given social contract, and the goal is corporate capital accumulation, as well as the state, regardless of what state it is, whether it's the United States or Russia or any other state, would be using artificial intelligence and high-tech advancements for militarism, military adventures, mass destruction, and for police state methods, mass surveillance, with implication that we are headed toward authoritarianism under the guise of, well, the technology is leading all of this. It's the technology that's leading all this. So these are very important issues to get out there in front, rather than get lost in the minutia, in the details of the Chinese chatbot model versus the Silicon Valley ones. And of course, there have been, just as an aside, by the way, I just recently read an article that actually already, although this is late, this thing, the Chinese model, the DeepSeek model, R1 was just introduced. Already they have done some studies to determine how they each respond. OpenAI, the GPT, ChatGPT versus the DeepSeek R1 model, how they respond to different questions, basically mostly ethical questions. And it's interesting that they don't respond the same, by the way, because the programmers behind artificial intelligence algorithms, the programmers are really the ones who determine the outcome of the model. So, for example, in questions that had to do with social justice and ethical questions about theft and so forth, the Chinese model responded differently, placing actually more emphasis on community welfare and social justice versus the Silicon Valley one, which placed emphasis on what some have characterized as Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, which is, this is the moral standard that you have to follow no matter what. And it's based on individual interest, individual ethics, individual value system. So the individualism value system of the West is reflected in the algorithm of Silicon Valley. The collectivism algorithm, value system of the Chinese is reflected in the algorithm of the chatbot that DeepSeek has developed. So that's an aside, but that's very interesting to keep in mind that the machine is just a machine. It's whatever it's fed. And there had been, even before this, there had been some university studies of artificial intelligence programs. And it turns out that if the programmer had undertones of xenophobia, racism, misogyny, that was also reflected in the machine, by the way. So let's keep that in mind, that, this is how these things work. Now, I do want to point, getting back to the larger issues here, that there is a human fascination with artificial intelligence. It is as though it is the technical God that human beings create. And it's as though human beings expect this to be the panacea for solving humanity's problems, when in fact it's constructed. This is part of the social contract. It operates within the framework of the given social contract and the social order, the given political system. So it actually advances the interests of the privileged elites in the social contract. And so we should not be deluding ourselves that as wonderful as an advancement, scientific and technological advancement as artificial intelligence is, that it is a panacea on a universal level, and it will lift all of humanity on an equal basis. It will not do that. In fact, it may exacerbate some problems, and there have been many studies, by the way, okay? Many studies warning about everything from the possibility of artificial intelligence devices making the decisions of war even easier, and therefore humans taking risk because the machine is in front there, to artificial intelligence devices displacing hundreds of millions of people. The European Union, by the way, is some time ago, they commissioned a study to asking scholars from around the world, actually, this is how I found out about it, to see what they thought, what would the impact be on labor management relations, and on how the artificial intelligence device may create a surplus labor force, which creates a socioeconomic problem, and that creates a political problem and chaotic conditions with the possibility of revolutionary upheaval. So these are important questions to consider, rather than getting lost in let's see what chatbot Silicon Valley versus chatbot China is better at, and whether they can, whether they can protect our personal data, and which is important, by the way. None of these things protect personal data; they're commercialized in any case. But but these are important questions and need to be asked, because the focus has been on the national tech race. Broadly speaking, within that is artificial intelligence. China versus the US, China versus India versus Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, European Union, and so forth. It isn't really like that, because the working class across the world is not necessarily going to benefit. Yes, there will be medical, surgical procedures that artificial intelligence will help. It's already applied, by the way. And that will be wonderful. There will be artificial intelligence robots searching for miners trapped down in mines, and it will help rescue them. All of that is true, all of it. It will help with the environment. It will help with a lot of things. But the idea that the artificial intelligence technology and its application under the existing social contract of neoliberalism on a world scale will somehow uplift humanity as a whole, that is really delusional, to put it bluntly, because it's just not in the cards. Now, let me point out that the whole controversy with, and it is controversial and it did send shockwaves, with DeepSeek R1 model, artificial intelligence R1 model, that chatbot that was introduced on January 27th, did take the world by storm. And the reason is that people just didn't expect it this soon. And another reason is because of assumptions that the West always makes about China being a follower, being sort of this like a third world country, although China really has industrialized faster in the history of industrialized countries, with England in the 18th century being the first country in the world to industrialize. No country has industrialized as fast as China in history since the 18th century, since England. None. And no country has achieved the kind of scientific and technological and industrial development other than China ever in history. China is unique in this respect. This actually invokes fears. However, at the same time, there is the lingering view in the West that China is really a follower, not a leader, a follower. So they didn't expect DeepSeek to come out, this obscure high-tech company, to come out this fast with a device that rivals OpenAI, which is behind the chatbot of Silicon Valley that's thriving in the Western world, especially the United States. They just didn't expect it. And another reason is, of course, on January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump takes over as president. The next day, he invited CEOs, 3 billionaires, in the White House, and he announced a 500 billion, half a trillion, investment program, mostly by the private sector, although there will be corporate welfare injected into this, and the taxpayer is going to foot the bill for some of this, and government contracts guaranteed, because the Pentagon is a huge buyer. All of government, by the way, because Donald Trump and Elon Musk, his right-hand man, intent on reforming the federal bureaucracy, have made no secret of the fact that they want to bring much more high-tech into the federal bureaucracy and make it less labor-intensive, so more tech-intensive, which means billions of dollars spent, okay, contracts which benefit the Silicon Valley, by the way, okay, and reduce the labor force, the human force. This is, of course, a case in point of how artificial intelligence, this is the beginning. We'll see, because this is in the courts right now. We'll see where all of this goes, but this is a case in point of how machine replaces humans and where this is all going to lead. On the 21st of January, the President of the United States did make this call for a new venture called Stargate, which would apparently create at least 100,000 high-paying jobs. Now, 100,000 high-paying jobs is not a lot of money when you have a population of 350 million and about 165 million in the labor force. That's really not a lot of money. The people that were with the president were the CEOs of SoftBank, the Japanese investment company, the CEO of Oracle, and the CEO of OpenIA, the ChatGPT, which is behind the ChatGPT, competing now with China's R1 model. Now, the other companies, by the way, the so-called Magnificent Seven, there is most of the Magnificent Seven. This includes NVIDIA, Microsoft, ARM, Google, are supposed to participate in this project as well. This is on January 21st. The reason I'm mentioning this because this was an illustration that the United States model in high tech, and especially in artificial intelligence, was that it was always capital intensive, that the solution, that's why I'm stressing this, that the key, that the catalyst was a capital intensive sector, pour money into it, both public and private, by the way, because the United States operates as a neoliberal corporate welfare state. This doesn't mean, by the way, that the rest of the governments around the world do not kick in corporate welfare money into their companies, because they do, including China, obviously, which has a quasi-status model with neoliberal aspects built into this, into their political economy. So yes, that's true. It's true that state-supported capitalism, it operates on a universal scale. We have a capitalist world economy, and state-supported capitalism operates in this manner, and these corporations are the beneficiaries for it. It's all true. Now, a few days later, DeepSeek shocks the world, and the immediate shock is felt in the stock market, especially in the US stock exchange, with some of the biggest names like NVIDIA, which company took a huge hit, losing 22% of its market capitalization value. Now, this was the #1 market cap company in the world. I believe now it's not, has fallen to #2. So you have a shock to NVIDIA, because NVIDIA, the poster child of capital intensive artificial intelligence solutions, more money and more money into NVIDIA coming in from all over the world. And we'll see how this is very important for the US economy, that foreign capital inflows coming in to the US economy and to the US government, by the way, and it's related to US Treasury bonds. I'll talk about that in due course. NVIDIA took a huge hit, and there was a sense of panic. They all, including Trump, came out and said, yes, this is important. This is very important. Of course, what a wonderful solution here. This is what competition is all about. However, let's look at facts. They did not expect such a small company. They've been around, by the way, the founder, the person behind the funding of all this, started, the man is Chinese entrepreneur, started back, a mathematician, by the way, started back during the Great Recession of 2008 to and gradually, especially after 2014, 2015, he began making more and more progress with the artificial intelligence company he wanted to build. And DeepSeek is the result of this. And he did it. The reason this was a shock is because all of this took place against the background of Western tariffs, Western blockade of companies, especially in the last 8 years, not allowed to provide semiconductors and to provide the machines that make the semiconductors to China. And foreign companies from Taiwan Semiconductor to Holland has some of the most advanced machinery for semiconductors, being basically, I don't want to use the word bullied, but encouraged by the United States not to do business with the Chinese. The Chinese were feeling the squeeze in high tech for the last 8 years. In other words, it starts with Trump, it continues with Biden. Now, of course, it's continuing with Trump again. So this is the environment. This is the economic nationalism environment and the blockade and the environment of the United States basically pressuring Huawei. I don't know how many people remember this, but Huawei is actually behind one of the companies, the communication giant, by the way, in China, and known, it's a global brand name in telephones, communications, providing the chips for DeepSeek R1. So the Chinese were, in fact, feeling the squeeze. Now there are reports, and in fact, some Silicon Valley executives have accused individuals and perhaps even companies smuggling in products that DeepSeek used from the United States, other parts of the world. There are stories that Taiwan Semiconductor was violating the U.S. Ban on exporting anything to the Chinese high-tech companies and so forth. No matter what, the fact is they got it. Of course, they deny it. They deny that they stole anything, but they got it. And the announcement was that they did it on very little money, 5-6 million. Now, when you dig deeper, okay, and I have looked at not just Western, but also their own studies, that is Chinese. The fact is they did spend more than 5 million. This is not a $5 million project. This is much more expensive, but it's not the NVIDIA multi-trillion-dollar cap company. It's not this $500 billion program, the Stargate program that Trump announced. It's not this massive capital-intensive enterprise that Western companies model as the panacea, and that is whether it's in South Korea, Japan, Europe, and so forth, and especially Silicon Valley. So the shock was at various levels. It was at the level where nobody expected it. It's too soon. Yes, we thought they would come up with it, but down the road, not right now. Not 6 days after Trump made the Stargate announcement with Larry Ellison, the other CEOs in the White House, these billionaires surrounding him with dollar signs in their eyes because they know that a $500 billion program would involve taxpayer money. in some form or another, whether it would be tax cuts or what have you. In any case, they also were shocked by something else. The company announced that it did all of this using far less energy than the Silicon Valley models, much more efficiently. The efficiency part was also a shock that they would do it because far less energy is linked to environmental issues. And the West wants the world, especially the United States, which, by the way, Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Treaty, no secret, wants the world to believe we protect the environment. After all, we eat yogurt. We protect the environment. Um, but the reality is the program over in China, the uh, DeepSeek R1 model, the chatbot model, uses far less energy, costs a lot less, and potentially it would be either at low cost or free to the public, um, with some high-end users perhaps being charged the fee uh, in due course. So this is a very important dimension of it, the efficiency of this product. Now, it is true that the uh, management, the top people of the Magnificent Seven companies, the high tech high flyers in the United States, in the Silicon Valley, with the exception of Tesla, with the exception of Musk, who worked for Trump, and he couldn't come out very well, couldn't come out and really say anything positive about DeepSeek. But the other six companies did make positive statements. Microsoft, Google, they all did. Meta, Zuckerberg's operation, they all made positive statements as well. Yeah, this is indeed very important. It's competitive. We'll take a look at it. We may use it. That sort of thing. Now, the question, of course, is the about DeepSeek is what signal did it send to the West about its application uh, to defense, as well as other critical sectors. Sorry, the United States, of course, is the leading country in the world in defense spending, and there is a an inexorable tie between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon. The military industrial complex is not the old military industrial complex that President Dwight Eisenhower announced on his way out in January 61, I believe, is when he made the speech. When he was leaving, he made the speech about the military industrial complex. It's not that military industrial complex with the old factories. This is high-tech military industrial complex, because those of you who've been to Washington, D.C., when you go to from Pentagon City all the way out to Pentagon, you see massive billboards with companies promoting something they want to sell to the Pentagon. And it's not the companies you would think of. It's companies like, it's high-tech. It's high-tech companies. And some of them have offices right near there, from Alexandria to the airport all the way out to Arlington, Virginia. They have their offices there because that's where the business is. So what you have here is concern, not just by Silicon Valley, not just by the private sector and Wall Street, which of course experienced a decline in the high-tech segment, but the state, that is government, Trump, by the way, himself did say, "Well, this is really something." Of course, behind the scenes, as we'll see, he was doing something else. Now, the security, the national security issue is what I'm trying to say here. The national security issue immediately became a forefront issue, not just the issue of, oh, they're going to take business away from us, which they are, by the way, because corporations, including some Silicon Valley corporations, said, well, we might give this a test run here, see what happens. Cheaper, and maybe it is the miracle of new technology. The other thing that happened that sent an additional shock wave, now though not as much as DeepSeek, is Alibaba and a company called Zippo. Two other, Alibaba is widely known all over the world. Zippo is not nearly as well known. Also announced that they were coming up with artificial intelligence assistant apps. So it seemed that China was really focused a lot in rivaling the rest of the world in artificial intelligence, and not relying just on this one company. By the way, I should also say, mention as an aside, this is perhaps too much detail, but the head of the company of DeepSeek did go, before they went public, before the company went public with the announcement about the R1 model, artificial intelligence model, they did, to give you an idea of how the role of the government, how important the role of the government is, because this is a communist party state, one party state. The state has an enormous role in guiding the course of the economy, 5-year economic plans, okay, development plans, massive money poured into science and technology as well as education. So there was a meeting, not with Xi Jinping, but with high-level cabinet officials, his government officials, and company management, top management. They did present. They went to them first. They presented whatever they had to say, and then I think a couple of days later, they went public. A few days later, they went public with the announcement. This is important, but it also, for the Chinese, but it also sent the signal to the West, oh, yeah, they're going to be using this kind of technology for mass surveillance, or we'll talk about that, mass surveillance of their own population to conform to the Communist Party, and they're going to apply it to every sector of their military-industrial complex. So that's just another dimension of it. Now, mainstream neoliberal analysts in the West, not just, but especially in the United States, politicians, business people, academics, think tank media people, made certain assumptions about China, and they still do. Although DeepSeek came out with this announcement, they don't change. They make certain assumptions about the Chinese economic model. And one of the reasons for the shock is because they live with these delusional assumptions and refuse to stare reality in the face, look at things on an empirical basis for what they are. One assumption is that technological innovation best takes place the way it did in the 18th century, when England was the first country in the world to have an industrial revolution, applying science and technology and to mass production, mass factory production. Okay, an open society, a liberal. By liberal, I mean in the classical sense of the word, capitalist system. In other words, in a capitalist economy where Private capital is protected by the state, and it is allowed to operate freely, and innovation is best takes place when entrepreneurs, businessmen are allowed to pursue profit motive operations, and that has derivative effects for the rest of society. Fine. Adam Smith type of thinking, which again, Adam Smith lived in the English economists, lived in the 18th century. They believed that any kind of a society that has a quasi-state system like China, one-party state, a society where the state still determines under the five-year plans, the course of economic planning, social development, economic development, as well as international operations, international development, like the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. They have difficulty with that, especially under the neoliberal model that the United States, and not just the United States, but South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Europe, most of the world operate in. They couldn't grasp that, in fact, that model actually made it easier. In spite of sanctions and bans of exporting technology to China by Western companies, in spite of the containment policy, both military and economic, that the US and its allies had imposed on China for the last 8 years, Western analysts couldn't grasp that these people would be able to do what DeepSeek announced at the end of January. By the way, we got something to rival what Silicon Valley is selling. So that took them by surprise. Now, they also make other assumptions, by the way, that indeed China, and this goes back to the Maoist Cultural Revolution, of course, and then Tiananmen Square in the 80s. They look at China today, right now, and they have, for a long time, as an authoritarian society that tightly controls its population. And I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not saying I don't want to portray China as Norway, by the way. That's a far cry. That's not the case at all. But they point out that, in fact, China is interested in artificial intelligence, and they're going to use this for surveillance, mass surveillance. And they're going to use this for drone production. And it's true that China is the world's number one drone producer, by the way. It is also true that China is planning a mass campaign of placing more surveillance cameras. They have more installed right now than any country in the world. Okay, now we'll talk more about that. It is also true that China is interested in using artificial intelligence for its defense sector. However, here's the however. Let's deconstruct that. China has a population of 1.5 billion people and 200,000 surveillance cameras. The United States has 350 million people and 50,000 cameras, surveillance cameras. Okay. On a percentage base, what do we have here? Especially when we consider that the United States is not one-party state, does not advertise itself as a state that is paternalistic. Historically, by the way, even before Mao, China had the state structure. The state was like the father of the family, took care of the family, took care of the people. U.S. has no such tradition. It's in the culture of individualism, atomism. And yet, surveillance cameras, 50,000 and 350 million people, they have 200,000, they have 1.5 billion people. Okay. Now, they do plan, by the way, both in the US and China to install a lot more cameras. The Chinese want to bring it up, I think I've read somewhere, to 500,000. But remember the number, the size of the population. Now, the other thing, of course, the U.S. Noted with the DeepSeek, in connection with DeepSeek, and the many analysts, not the U.S., I should say, analysts in the West, Canadians included, Canada, by the way, is also in the business of developing artificial intelligence. Others argued, well, defense sector, okay. Who has more links to defense? IA companies in China or Silicon Valley companies to the Pentagon? Some companies in the Silicon Valley are there simply because they have government contracts, especially with the Defense Department. If those were pulled, they would go out of business. Okay. China, it is no secret, spends a small percentage of what the U.S. spends on defense. The U.S. spends just under $1 trillion on defense. China is less than 3 times lower than what the U.S. spends. Okay. It is no secret that the United States' geopolitical dimension of its global hegemony, Pax Americana, takes precedence over all else. Just look at defense spending. That tells the story. It is also no secret that China's goal is global economic hegemony. They want to integrate the world. I've mentioned this word in hegemony, Chinese hegemony, economic hegemony, in other videos that I've done about China, and some Chinese commentators have written to me that China is not interested in economic hegemony. Well, that may not be their goal, but just by the virtue and the recent, by the way, inclusion of Indonesia into the BRICS group illustrates that China actually did not impose any kind of hegemony on Indonesia. They just accepted them and stressed mutual benefits and so forth. That's true. However, just by virtue of the fact that China is the world's #1 economy in GDP when measured in purchasing power parity, 7-8 trillion ahead of the United States, just by virtue of that, that's hegemony. Structurally, they are in a position of calling the shots just by the virtue of that, okay, of determining the terms of trade to a lot greater degree than, let's say, Colombia or Venezuela. Okay, we have to be realistic about this. Now, the United States, another dimension of the United States concern about the DeepSeek R1 model, artificial intelligence model, is that China is in fact going to use it in its manufacturing sector. And it is no secret that China is the world's #1 producer of electrical vehicles and rapidly moving into autonomous vehicles which use artificial intelligence chips. Okay, so the U.S. is concerned about that sector, that China is going to dominate the auto industry on a world scale. Already, the #1 producer of electric vehicles is not Tesla. A lot of people think it's Tesla or some Western companies or Toyota or Honda. It's not. or a German company. It's China. It's BYD, a Chinese company. And so the United States is concerned that this is bad news because artificial intelligence is going to be applied in the manufacturing sector, and they're already number one in the world. They are the factory of the world, by the way. They're the number one exporter of the world. They are the trading partner to the world, enjoying over $1 trillion in surplus, in trade surplus. Okay, while the U.S. suffers a current account deficit, a balance of payments deficit on a chronic basis, along with rising public debt. So that those things are important because artificial intelligence figures into this equation. So there has been concern about that. The United States is also concerned that it's losing the leverage. It's losing the leverage that it thought it had before DeepSeek came out with the announcement. Even if they had come out with this announcement, by the way, you know, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, it wouldn't have made much difference. However, here's another dimension, and this one I had to dig up, to research, to find out why the concern and why the reaction that is, and I'll cover that next, why the reaction by US Congress and the president, and then, of course, G7 and the other partners allied to the G7. Actually, there is a direct correlation between artificial intelligence companies, Silicon Valley, and the health of the US economy and the health of the dollar as a reserve currency, as a hard currency. What has been happening since the first Trump administration, from the time that he announced back in 2017 that 2 trillion gift, basically a reduction, tax reduction, is about, by the way, to introduce more of that this year, 2025. From that time to 2017 to the present, 2025, there has been a reduction in foreign money coming to the United States buying treasury bonds. Chinese owned well over $1 trillion. They're down to $750 billion. They've been dumping them slowly. It's not in their interest to be dumping treasury bonds. They still want the dollar to be safely strong, safe and fairly strong. They don't necessarily want a weak dollar. So that's a myth that they're manipulating the currency. And by the way, all countries manipulate, all central banks manipulate currency just by the fact that they determine monetary rates. So that's another myth. But the fact is that foreign investors looking to make a buck have not been enthusiastic about pouring money into treasuries. But they have been in the last 8 years, first Trump administration, Biden administration, up until now, enthusiastic about investing in the U.S. stock market, and especially in high tech, and especially in the Magnificent Seven, all involved in artificial intelligence. And above all, NVIDIA, which is the reason that NVIDIA reached such staggering, such astronomical heights in market capitalization, way up there, close to 4 trillion market cap, unbelievable. It's now backed off those highs, but the question is, why is there a correlation? For two reasons. The U.S. suffers a budgetary deficit of 1.8 trillion and a current account deficit of 1.2 trillion. That brings us to 3 trillion. That's not good because it has an impact on the dollar. You print more paper, you lose the value on the dollar. However, that's made up by money coming in, inflows, capital inflows to the market. That has kept the dollar strong. Now comes this Chinese company. And what happens with tech investors? They scratch their heads. There was a rush of analysts and different companies doing assessments on NVIDIA and the Silicon Valley companies to argue that don't fall for this Chinese second-rate company that stole our technology. They're going nowhere. We're still king. We produce the quality stuff. NVIDIA will be back to greater heights. It may be. It may be. I don't know. I have no crystal ball to predict where stock market is going. This is all speculative. But therein lies the problem, that this is financialization of the economic system in the United States and in the G7, whereas China does not operate under a financialization model of its economy. Financialization means that you take a look at your economy and you place the value on the speculative aspect of the stock market. And then comes along this company called DeepSeek and says, by the way, we can do it better, cheaper, and we use less energy. Besides, we'll make it widely, universally available and then we'll charge, we'll see how we can make advertisements. Obviously, is one way they make money. So this is important because it has to do, although, like I said, I had to do some research to dig this up. There is a correlation between the health of the balance of payments issue, the debt, the public debt rising, and it's about to go higher, by the way, because the Trump administration wants to lower the taxes of the richest Americans as though they need it. And where's the money going to come from if foreign capital doesn't keep coming in? Trump did announce that there was a pledge from the Saudi prince that Saudi Arabia, for the next few years, not all in one lump sum, is going to kick in 600 billion. Okay, brave talk. But then there's the Israeli question in Gaza, which Trump proposed making it, reducing it into high-end real estate, luxury apartments, hotels for the rich. Make it the Riviera, the equivalent of the French Riviera down in Gaza, and let somebody else deal with the Palestinians. Have Egypt and the rest take the Palestinians. Well, Saudi Arabia absolutely ruled that out. And there is a question of what happens with this number thrown out, 600 billion coming into the US economy. That's a respectable number. In a $28 trillion economy, it may not sound like a lot, but it's an important number because other Gulf states may kick in and follow Saudi Arabia. Symbolically, it's very important, and in real terms, it's very important. So what we have here with artificial intelligence is that angle. There's another angle. Countries, let's take Saudi Arabia with its grand schemes of building this city called Neom, which is, or the line, by the way, the city of the future, which will cost over $1 trillion. May go now. They may look at the Chinese and say, well, why not go with DeepSeek? Why use the Silicon Valley companies? They charge a lot. They're capital intensive. They're expensive. Why not use the Chinese? By the way, they will use Chinese companies no matter what, but they tend to be more pro-US, pro-West. Invited in BRICS, reluctant about joining, and so forth. So you have basically a concern there. What happens to the balance of the economy? It seems that no matter what the US is trying to do here, things aren't working out, and there is a refusal to look at the economic model itself, financialization of the economy, of the Pentagon, of Silicon Valley, injected into every sector, including this one in artificial intelligence. That is discounted because the financialization of the economy, of the American economy, is at the heart of the neoliberal model, and they're not going to abandon it. Both Trump and Biden were neoliberal, hard-nosed neoliberals, by the way. They differ in modalities, they differ on cultural issues, they differ on to what degree the U.S. should be sending troops every time there is a conflict that could easily be solved diplomatically, by the way. But they do not disagree on the goals of neoliberalism, which is to strengthen capital even more at the expense of the working class. And so artificial intelligence figures into this equation. Senator Josh Hawley, by the way, as well as President Trump, Josh Hawley is a Trump Republican, as well as Democrats and Republicans alike, rushed to stop the bleeding. And they did it in a typical way. The senator introduced the bill. We'll see if it passes. My guess is that it will, or some other version will. That anyone in the United States, any company, an individual doing business with China's IA gets a 20-year prison term and $1 million fine. How is that for economic nationalism? We'll send you to prison and take $1 million out of your pocket. They want to stop China, and they're relying on punitive measures, not just economic nationalism, but punitive measures, sanctions, tariff, restrictions, bans. All of this will be applied. And guess what? The one country after another, just as one state after another in the United States banned use of the Chinese app, okay, Chinese artificial intelligence app, countries from around the world either already committed or are thinking about committing to the same principle as the US. Don't use the Chinese app. Don't rely on, let's take DeepSeek. Don't rely on DeepSeek's R1 model, artificial chat model, okay? So the solution is not to re-examine the financialization and not to make high-tech less capital intensive, and not to retreat from wasteful corporate welfare spending, as we have seen with the CHIPS Act, billions committed, and Intel stock used to be $40, $45, is now down, way down in the 20s. So Intel was one of the beneficiaries, by the way, of corporate welfare, and look what the stock performance is. The quality of the company hasn't improved any just because they poured billions in of taxpayer money, by the way, hasn't improved, and committed to more. Okay, so they're not examining. There's no self-examination. There's no sense of maybe we're doing something wrong. Should we look in the mirror? On the contrary, it's defensive position. We're right, they're wrong. Although they're the ones keep coming up with innovations, by the way. That's the mind-boggling aspect of this. And by the way, again, truth be told, American companies, there are many American companies that want to use the Chinese app. They want to use artificial intelligence companies from China. However, they can't because the US government and individual states told companies, any of you, now we'll see if Josh Hawley's bill passes, that do business with the government can't do business with the Chinese. Fine, it's the right of the US government to do that. However, China retaliated. They retaliated by hitting the United States in several sectors, in coal, oil, liquefied natural gas, in other products, and they're looking very seriously at at two of the magnificent seven companies that may be looking at others, Apple and Google, both involved in artificial intelligence. Both, especially Apple, by the way, no secret, needs China. Not to mention the fact that without the rare earth minerals of China, Silicon Valley is in trouble. Now, it's not in China's interest to cut them off, but they can, as they have, cut back. So the question here is, and we'll see, maybe Xi Jinping and Donald Trump may come to some agreement and all of this will be behind us. And, you know, as Steve Forbes has said that a lot of this stuff on tariffs is not sustainable, you know, hitting everybody from, and this is just China, but hitting everybody from Canada and Mexico to European Union, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, all of them, is no way to proceed to manage an economy, the world's largest economy in nominal value only, by the way. So this is what we have. This is the answer of the United States. Now, switching gears here, because I want to bring this to a close. I still believe, as I said at the outset of this video session, that the issue here is not one of the nation state in China versus the nation state of the United States. The issue here is, how does science and technology benefit the planet and humanity? That's the issue, not the nationalist framework, as though we're in the Olympic Games or it's some kind of a national soccer team, Germany versus Italy, so forth. You know, nationalism clashes. This is not that. This is not how it should be framed. The question is, can science and technology benefit humanity, or is all this framing, the media and analysts and businesses and politicians frame it in nationalist terms to distract the working class from the calamities that have befallen them, from its own problems, the calamities that have befallen them as a result of the neoliberal capitalist model, that their living standards are declining. And I'm talking about, by the way, Western countries, especially because there is upward social mobility in China, by the way, precisely because China has a program of social development and raising living standards, because they can't sustain the 5%. A lot of you may know that they have at least keeping GDP growth at 5%, sustaining it for the next 5 to 10 years to achieve some of the economic goals. And they know that there's a trade squeeze, not just the United States, but globally. So they increase consumption demand in the of their own population. The consumer sector, the personal consumption spending in China, by the way, is 15% lower. It's at 53% versus 68 in the United States than the United States. So they have a long way to go. Now they don't. I'm sure they don't want to bring it up to 68%. It used to be higher for the United States, but the income, the socioeconomic gap, by the way, has increased since the Great Recession of 2008. So what we have here is an issue that concerns humanity. Humanity is not just the elites. It's not just the political class and the social and the business class, the corporate management and investors. It's everybody. Period. That's humanity. So the artificial intelligence issue is not about. This is not a video game. It's not about, oh, this has this nuance and it's fascinating. And it's not about the nation, our nation state, our country is now first in this. What does that mean? How does that benefit humanity? That's the fundamental question. I want to say one more thing and then we'll end it. And that is the dimension of militarism and authoritarianism. Many have warned that, of course, the United States analysts have warned that militarism and police state methods will be increasing in China as a result of IA. China keeps saying, well, look at yourself in the mirror. You're the one who has military presence in 175 countries. We have military presence in 2 countries. Okay. Now, authoritarianism and police methods and militarism will be made with technology, artificial intelligence, easier and more deadly. So there is that dimension of it. So the question of this fascination of the public worldwide with robotics, artificial and self-driving cars, everything that uses the chip, is one that should be reflected on, and people should be thinking about how can humanity derive optimal benefits, maximum benefits in complicated surgery, for example, and helping with the environment, which, of course, the United States under Trump disagrees that we are in a climate change condition. And in fact, he directed the Environmental Protection Agency to drop the term from their computers, climate change. Just dropped it, don't use it. Artificial intelligence can be for the good of humanity, or it can contribute to further problems for humanity and create problems among nation states. I want to thank you for listening. Please write comments, observations, ask questions, and please join this channel. Asad Ali, my very good friend, manages it, and we would love you to be members of it and receive notices of educational program. Thank you very much.